Okay.
There we go.
So now where we are up to in the Torah portions, in the narrative of the Torah portions, we actually cross this week a certain threshold in the scriptural narrative, because from the beginning of the Torah, which speaks about creation of the world and the unfolding of humanity, Adam and Eve, and the descendants, morning and Adi, there's any lessons. There are many lessons have really been framed in what can be seen as like a historical narrative. The unfolding of our people, from the Hebrews to the Jewish people, even though they're not called Jews technically at the time, but they are Jews technically, and they received the Torah, and it brings us up to, roughly speaking, post-Torah. Now, what with receiving the Torah? Now, there is a part of the narrative which is postponed a couple of weeks, and because it isn't, the historical narrative is not always chronological. There's always a reason for it not to be chronological when it's not, but generally it is. It's not always. But we read about God speaking to the Jewish people and giving the Ten Commandments at Sinai, and Moses going up the mountain for 40 days to receive the Torah. What we haven't yet read, and we won't read for a couple of weeks, is that Moses came down, he saw the Jews misbehaving with the golden calf, and he broke the tablets, and then he begged God for forgiveness. He went back up the mountain for another 40 days, came down, went back up the mountain for 40 days. God says, okay, I'll give you second tablets. And he came down with the second tablets. In other words, there was rehabilitation for the Jewish people on Yom Kippur. So they started off June time, when we celebrate Shavuos in our world, in our calendar, and then Yom Kippur, they came down with the second tablets. Historically, the day after Yom Kippur, in other words, once we'd had our Torah, God commanded Moses to create a tabernacle. That a tabernacle was going to be a place that was going to be a locus, a place for a nexus between the divine and the human. It was a very physical place, but being there was very supernatural. If people felt God, no one was in the temple and questioning, is there God, is there not? That could be outside, inside. It was a very clear, the ambiance and what they saw was something that it was unmistakable to them. And that would eventually, it was a temporary structure, and it would eventually become, and hundreds of years later, that would become the temple that we have in Jerusalem. Western wall was the western retaining wall of a temple that stood, and that was destroyed and was rebuilt. So that's the big deal. The temple. Before, there was this temple that was so important for 830 years as a center of Jewish civilization. There was this thing they had in the desert, a portable, temporary tabernacle. But when I say across this threshold, is that aside from little bits and pieces of historical narrative, from here on it gets much more into we're done with the unfolding of the Jewish people. Now we get down to business of mitzvahs and some of the events in the desert until the end of the Torah, which is when Moses passed away, before we go into the desert. So today's focus is not going to be, as these lessons go, we use often pieces of the Torah portion and understandings that come from the Torah portion to help us understand things well beyond it. The real focus of today's conversation is not going to be so much about the tabernacle in the desert. It's going to be about me and you, and the fact that we're human, and that humans are by definition not always consistent in their values, in implementing their values. As a matter of fact, when I was as a adolescent, when I started to study Tanya, which is the fundamental textbook of Chabad thought, written by a very holy founder of Chabad, Rabbi Zalman, the first Rebbe of Chabad, I was grateful to find that he addressed the idea that people aren't perfect, and that human struggle is normal, and that not having the enthusiasm today for what I had yesterday, or later on in the afternoon for what I think I'd really want to do this morning, is normal. And so really his book is very much about grappling with ourselves and by finding our best selves and addressing very normal human pitfalls. One of those pitfalls is the idea of what could say is there's inconsistency. So if someone may say to me, if I say, you're here, would you like to put on tefillin? I'll say, Rabbi, you don't know what I had for breakfast. You know I'm going later. What's this? What does that have to do with it? I say, who cares? I mean, who cares? God cares. But right now we have a mitzvah. We have an opportunity for a mitzvah. Let's do a mitzvah. And some people find it a little bit, come on, we're playing a game, or it's a little hypocritical, or whatever words they may use. Today's conversation is about the value of a mitzvah kind of in a standalone way, and how Torah sees human life and opportunities, the opportunity to do good things, and how attached those good things, those actions have to be to what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do in 5 minutes from now. As an introduction, we'll look at I don't know if it's on let me see. No, sorry. Let me just see what this is up to. Oh, actually, no. I didn't share this yet. So 1 second. Excuse me. I'm going to, in a moment, I'm going to share the screen, but there's something here that is not on the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to bring it up. The introduction says, asks us to consider the following scenario. It's on page 117 of those who have the book. On Yom Kippur, (1929), 3 Jewish mobsters, Louis Fleischer, Harry Fleischer, and Henry Shore, attended services at Orthodox congregation B'nai David in Northwest Detroit. As sterling members of the Purple Gang, all 3 had plenty to atone for. Their gang controlled the city's illegal gambling, had a hand in most of Detroit's underworld vice, and was responsible for countless counts of arson, bombing, and murder. Question: do these 3 men belong in the synagogue? Were they hypocrites for attending synagogue in Yom Kippur before they renounced their crimes? Then there's another scenario which we don't have to go into. It's a similar point. The question is, if someone has done bad things, and the idea of them being honored by the synagogue is a separate question. If someone wants to come in, they want to come in to this is what Jews do. They want to come in and pray. Is there something morally off with saying, yesterday you're doing your mafia stuff, and now because Yom Kippur you come in and then and tomorrow you're back to mafia? It seems inconsistent. Is there something morally off with that? I don't know how any of you feel. If any of you want to share your feelings, ready to hear. Not consistent behavior.
Well, there's always hope. There's always hope. And praise and changes. There's always hope.
I'm with you, Andrea. And so, but even what you're saying there, you're saying there's always hope that maybe a change will come from this. Well, what if we knew that there's no change coming, but it's just that it's Yom Kippur and they're here, or it's Sunday morning they're putting on tefillin and we have some crystal ball, we know they're not changing their life. They want to put on tefillin. What would that mean? Now, you just said that consistent. What did you say, Gennady?
Consistent behavior on their part. Their behavior hasn't changed.
Well, but what do you make of them coming to Shul on Yom Kippur?
Beautiful.
But
Even Scott said it's beautiful. So
I'm just saying what I think.
as Jews,
I would say that. What?
as Jews, should they be excommunicated because they have not yet made atonement?
God forbid. So I mean, I don't want to jump to the end of it, but certainly.
In order to discriminate, you have to have different ideas about Judaism. Fluent people and Robert people, not enough to get discriminated. Right?
Right. So I would.
God
Yeah.
is a forgiving God. So why wouldn't they be?
I'm with you there, and just as a backdrop to this, because I think you'll all know where this is going to go, but I want to make a case for it. Some of you know that many years ago, my brother-in-law, who has Chabad in Cherry Hill, he called me in a panic. This must have been 25 years ago. And we were both young and just trying to get traction. And he had become friendly with a rabbi down there, former rabbi. Actually, he had not become friendly with him. I had tried to call to get an appointment with him when my brother-in-law moved in, and he wouldn't see me. But this rabbi was accused at the time, and ultimately I think he's still sitting for hiring someone to kill his wife. And that he was arrested in those days, and he was out on bail, and he became a pariah in the community. And where does someone go for services if they're a pariah in the community? Chabad. So he said he sent word that he plans on coming to services there, and people went nuts. They don't want him in there.
They never met his wife.
But there's another question implied in here.
Yeah,
This is an Orthodox synagogue.
yeah.
If it were a Reform synagogue, would they be more acceptable?
I can't speak for the Reform movement. I think it's really about, I mean, they were talking about the facts of what it was. Immorality is morality. I don't know what the Reform synagogue would say. And I can't even speak for this Orthodox synagogue. I'm trying to speak for Torah. And in this case, my brother-in-law I told him he has to meet with his people, but explain that for us, the only time a Jew is not welcome in shul is if they're a danger to others. Otherwise, family and everybody has a place here. So don't give them an aliyah, but they have. This is we cannot and do not and should not close the door to anybody unless they're a danger to people inside. So we're going to start with exploring this idea of the sanctuary. This that we speak about this week's Torah portion, and that's okay. So I'm going to share screen. Sorry. Oops. I think. Okay. So text 1 is from the beginning of this week's Torah portion. God says, "You shall make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you." And really, the entire Torah portion, it's a full Torah portion, is all about different parts of what went on in the temple. They were asking for, there were different types of materials, 13 different types of materials that were necessary. And there were different artifacts, holy furniture, so to speak, that had to be created for the sanctuary. So we have an entire Torah portion detailing this. And the way in, because this is from the Rebbe's address, the Rebbe asked, why spend so much time in the Torah on a dwelling that was temporary? If you're going to tell us how the temples should look, that's something else. That shows up later in the book of Kings. But the way, the structure of the tabernacle didn't teach us how to create the holy temple. This was for a short period. So why spend so much time on something transient is what the Rebbe's question was. And if you look to text 2, Maimonides, when he talks about the laws of creation of the Holy Temple, he says it's a positive commandment to construct a house for God, prepared for sacrifice to be offered within. We celebrate there 3 times a year. As the verse states, "You shall make for me a sanctuary." We're making me a sanctuary. That's what we just said, right? That's from this week's Torah portion. But how does he define it? He doesn't define it as the tabernacle. He defines the sanctuary as the temple. We had one temple, a second temple. When Mashiach comes, we have the third temple that will be eternal. The sanctuary constructed by Moses is already described in the Torah. It was only temporary, as the verse states. For at present, you have not come unto the resting place and the inheritance. When you come to Israel, God tells them in the desert, then when you settle in Israel, then you can have a permanent place. So here's the question, our way in. This is our portal into the concept. Why would God have spent so much, why Torah spent so much time on something transient? So now let's go back to mitzvahs for a second. Text 3. Text 3, before we get into it, text 3 talks about the laws of what we call the priestly blessing. A Kohen, which I am not, has a special place in the Jewish community for thousands of years. The Levi too, but we're talking the Kohen even more so. And the Kohen has a position of being able to be an instrument for God's blessing. So the Kohen, even today on holidays, Yom Tov, the Kohen blesses the congregation. In other words, not the Kohen blessing, but the Kohen blessing is God's blessing coming through the Kohen. So the Jewish law speaks about people, Kohens, who really shouldn't do the blessing. If they can't pronounce, if it's going to come out in a way that doesn't make sense, they can't speak the words, they better not do it. If they can't see the congregation because they have an impediment, there's certain things where there has to be something where the congregation should be able to appreciate what's going on and hear what's going on, and they should be able to see them. It also says that in cases of the Kohen was convicted of murder or converted out of Judaism, to say you're going to have to sit this one out. Those are kind of extremes.
There is such a thing as converting out of Judaism.
We call it Shema. You can't really convert out of Judaism. Yeah, but in other words, someone tried to. They accepted, they renounced their Judaism and they accepted another religion. And then for some reason they want to come and do this.
And if he is excommunicated, it's also converting out of Judaism.
Excommunicated?
Yes.
No.
So the Dutch Jew is still a Jew.
Spinoza, you mean?
Yes.
You're thinking of that a lot today? You keep on bringing us communication.
It's on my mind.
Yeah. We love you. We're never excommunicating you. So it says here that a priest who does not have any of the factors that inhibit the recitation of the priestly blessings should recite the priestly blessing, even though he's not a wise man or careful with mitzvah observance. So a person, okay, he's not a murderer, but he's a real sleazeball. And we know he's really done some horrible, horrible things. Text 3 on 119. This is true, even though people spread unwholesome gossip about him, or his business dealings are not ethical. He should not be prevented from reciting the priestly blessings. Why should this guy not be reciting the priestly blessings? He doesn't seem like someone whose blessings I would want. But really, the fact is that it's a mitzvah. Just like for us, it's a mitzvah to put up a mezuzah or to eat matzah on Passover, or to light Shabbos candles. It's a mitzvah for a Kohen to bless the people. So the Kohen has an obligation, and he has an opportunity for a mitzvah. He said he should not be represented from reciting the priestly blessings because doing so is a positive mitzvah incumbent upon each priest who is fit to recite them. We did not tell an unscrupulous person increase your unscrupulousness by failing to perform mitzvahs. So if someone comes in here today, and this is someone who has just been convicted of horrible, horrible crimes, and we feel that he's not going to be able to hurt anyone here, and you say, and he wants to put on tefillin, that's a horrible person. So you say we don't tell someone just because you've been so immoral, you're doomed to increase your immorality. They want to do a mitzvah, we'll allow them to do a mitzvah. And let's look at
actually, this text raises the question in exercise 1, were those 3 people Kohens or Levites?
That's a really a good point. If the question had been if one of them was a Kohen, whether that person should be giving the priestly blessing, I would say probably not.
Probably not, because there are a lot more Israelites.
Right, and no, it's because it's probably not. They shouldn't be doing it. They shouldn't be doing it because if the government if these are people who are seen as murderers, That's not for them. Like I said, I wouldn't be giving them an aliyah, but they weren't saying that. These are Jews who want to come to shul. Why is it anyone's business?
But if they're just a conduit for God's blessing,
Yeah.
it's not like they're not giving you the blessing.
But they're apparently
You have to see beyond their crime.
Jewish law apparently sees that as blocking up the conduit if they've done something so hard, if they've done something like murder.
But isn't this saying that the potential to do good, if there's an opportunity for even a bad person to do some good, that's what should overrule.
Generally, yes, absolutely. In Jewish law, it says there are certain exceptions that actually Jewish law brings a certain scriptural allusions to make the case why that would be over the top. Murder is something where sit down. I guess we see it as that really the Kohen has blocked their own ability to be a conduit. But that's only one. I mean, it's a horrible thing. But there are many other things which we would say would be immoral acts. I say you can still come up and do it, not because we think you're a great person, it's because you have a mitzvah. And why should you're a Jew? Why shouldn't you do a mitzvah?
Well, in The Godfather,
Yes.
there's one specific statement that refers to that, in which a guy who knows he's going off to be put down says, "It was not personal, it was just business."
Actually, I've heard that. All right.
Yeah, but back to the
Yeah.
question about temporary structure. And
Yeah.
it comes that when we build the third temple, all Jews will, and Messianic time, all the Jews will come to the Holy Land.
Yeah.
So all the shuls around the world will no longer be needed. So all the shuls are temporary structures, which is a temporary structure, which means anything outside of the.
I think that as much as attached as I feel to this shul and how beautiful it looks and how wonderful it's going to be, everything in the world pretty much is temporary. The point of what the question wasn't, I don't have an issue with temporary structures. If the question is why does the Torah spend an entire Torah portion about a temporary structure? It could have spoken about the eternal structure, which is the temple. It's not that there's something wrong with a temporary structure, but the Torah puts so much time on the temporary structure. The Torah doesn't talk about all the shuls in the world. Happens to be that the Talmud says that the temples will also be part of the Messianic era and so on. But I don't. It's to me, it's not the same thing. We're not speaking against transientness here. The question was, why would the Torah spend an entire Torah portion on something transient when it had the option on spending that on something on this place for God, which wasn't transient? It's right. We don't have it right now, but it's going to be rebuilt, and its purpose is to be more eternal.
Well, if all the Jews know that the temples they build around the world at some point become obsolete, now it tells you that it's not obsolete, just do it anyway, even though at the Messianic time it will no longer be needed because no Jew will be outside of
And I think that's be one of the things. Doing something, a good thing, even if it's not going to be forever, is still a good thing. I guess that's part of what we're getting at here. And in text 4, along these lines, on page 120, there's a verse from Ecclesiastes, which sounds kind of funny. It says, Ecclesiastes, it was King Solomon, says, don't be overly wicked and do not be foolish. Why die before your time? So don't be too wicked. Little wicked seems okay. So the Talmud jumps on that in 5a and says, Rav Ula taught, what is the meaning of the verse, do not be overly wicked? Does it mean to say that one should not be too wicked, but should be a little wicked? Rather, as the adage goes, and this is something that's repeated several times in the Talmud, and this is really a heart of what we're talking about. They brought up this idea: one who ate garlic and has bad breath, should they eat more garlic to make their breath smell even more? The idea is, if one is odious, do we say become even more odious, or you try to give them a breath freshener? or do we condemn people to their odiousness? So therefore, when what the Talmud is saying is as that's an answer for what did King Solomon mean? And if you look in text 5b, Rashi there in the Talmud explains, one who ate garlic and has bad breath, this is an answer. The Talmud explains the verse as if it says, if you did something wicked, don't add to your wickedness. In other words, don't be overly wicked. Don't compound your wickedness. For one who ate garlic may already appear smelly to another friend, but that doesn't mean they should eat more and perpetuate the bad odor. This is the idea of, we're saying is, someone's done something negative. Are we looking at ourselves and say, I'm not living this life? In the spiritual realm and God's scoreboard, maybe I see myself as having eaten garlic. Talmud says, so does it mean you should eat more garlic? We have a new opportunity right now to do a mitzvah. And in text 6, the Talmud elsewhere says, they raised the dilemma before Rav Chisda. One who ate and drank but did not recite a blessing should return and recite the blessing. What happens if we were downstairs, or we had the kiddush yesterday, we're upstairs, and we usually have the kiddush, and someone is eating challah, and they didn't make the blessing on Motzi? I say, by the way, did you make the blessing? I didn't make the blessing. So we should say, next time you got to do it. Remember for next Shabbos, or throw a tomato at him, or to make it now.
But he's not thinking on his own. He's just citing a previous reference.
Who's that? Who's that?
Chisda, yeah.
Rav Chisda? Well, it's his answer, whether it's a previous reference or not, because you don't know that. I don't think that Rav Ula lived for Rav Chisda. The point is that this was a common phrase that they're both tapping into. Rav Chisda said to them, one who ate garlic and has bad breath should eat more garlic to make the breath smell more. So I ate bread without a bracha. And now I want to keep eating. So eat more without a bracha, make a blessing now. So I wish in text 7, 122, I wish we could spend more time on this, but one of Maimonides is known for his code of law. Maimonides is known for his great philosophical work, Guide for the Perplexed. As I've studied Maimonides and his writings, I see he was an exquisite human being. And I remember sitting in graduate school and saying, I'm beginning to understand why the Rebbe loved this guy so much. He had, as brilliant, as committed as he was to religion, he had an understanding of people, and he had an understanding of a Judaism that had an understanding of people. And what they're quoting from here is, we just get a little snippet, is that there's some of his famous, he wrote a lot of letters, but there's some famous letters which were more than letters. They're like compositions they're published on their own. And one of them is known as Igeres Hashmad, the letter, the composition, or there's a better word for it, essay on conversion. And that's the Almohads. When the Almohads invaded Spain, that's when Maimonides and his family had to run for their lives. The Almohads were very, very brutal Muslims. And whereas many Muslims allowed Jews to, as long as they had a dhimmi status, as long as they were subservient, they weren't as brutal as the church. They let us live as long as we kissed the ring. But the Almohads did, and the Almohads they offered the choice Jews had was either convert or die. And for many Jews, they figured they're going to go into, they're not accepting another God per se, like Christianity, it's just a false prophet. And they said they would show up in mosque on Fridays. And the Almohads made them come to the mosque on Saturdays also. They had services on Saturdays too. And it was a very difficult time for the Jewish community. a rabbi from a different community wrote a scathing letter about those Jews who had acquiesced and succumbed to the pressure and had converted to Islam. And he wrote, so you go to mosque on Friday, and then you go home and secretly in your house you make kiddush Friday night. Said what you're doing is it's like you're throwing the wine in God's face. He said you're being disrespectful to God. It's making kiddush Friday night after you spent Friday during the day in the mosque. And Maimonides wrote. Remember, he had a very acerbic pen, and he wrote. He sliced and diced that rabbi's opinion, and he wrote in support of the Jewish community and the Jews, and for their own sense of self. Because actually some Jews started to commit suicide because they couldn't see if Judaism wasn't gonna, they didn't know where to go. And now the Jewish community is repelling them, and some of them just said, okay, if you're not going to have me, then I'm going to become a full-fledged Muslim. That rabbi's letter had terrible damage, and Maimonides wrote his letter, and in both on the legal end and on the philosophical end, totally took a different tack in supporting the Jews in this difficult time. And one of the things he said was, do a mitzvah. He went to the mosque. Whether it's as bad as that guy says or not as bad as that guy says, but the fact is, at home you have a chance to do a mitzvah, and God, it's precious to God. And one of the things he pointed to was actually a rabbinic, there are what we call 39 different types of creativity that the Torah tells us to stay away from on Shabbos. Then there's the rabbinics. One of the things of the rabbis tell me is not to even touch my phone on Shabbos, even though I'm not using the phone. It's something that it's what it is. It's using weekday things. We want to try and keep a more sacred perspective, and in our psycho-spiritual, today is different. And there's something called muktzah in Jewish law. There are things we don't even touch because this is something that it's a special day, and we don't want to bring even thoughts of the outside Shabbos into Shabbos. That's rabbinic. So one of the things Maimonides wrote in his this essay on conversion, whoever is text 7, whoever is affected by this forced apostasy ought to behave by the principles I outline. Place between your eyes, in other words, focus, to do and fulfill all the mitzvahs you are able. If it happens that one has already grossly violated and desecrated Shabbos, you guys are having a rough time with it. Maybe you violated Shabbos. They should still not move what is forbidden to be moved. Let's say you did something. Torah says don't light a fire Shabbos. I had to because of what was going on in the mosque. I had to light a fire Shabbos. Now I come home terrible. I violated Shabbos. He says you still got the rest of Shabbos to do. You do something good now is good. Don't even move what is forbidden. That's a rabbinic thing. He said be careful about Shabbos. Anything you can is precious to God. Don't say what I already violated is far worse than what I'm currently trying to avoid. So what's the point? Don't say this. Rather be careful with whatever possible. We look for decontextualize what we call small victories because they're precious to God. In text 8, they bring us to, relatively speaking, a more common day, current, contemporary way of looking at it. Also, a situation. When I was growing up, one of the great halachic decisors globally was a rabbi in Staten Island named Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. I've heard of him. People wrote to him questions from all over the world, and he had a question from a Jew in Mexico. Who was a Jew in Mexico want to do? Wants to make some money. And he had the possibility of putting up, but there are a lot of Jews in Mexico. And there's Mexico City itself has tens of thousands of observant Jews. I don't know about this time, but there's always been a strong Mexican Jewish community. So this person had an inn, and he was able to get in a sports stadium. He was able to get the concession, and he wanted to make kosher food. He had separate. He was going to do it all. He himself was not observant, but you go where the money is. So he's going to make dairy and meat, get it all done, and he calls in. He can't do it. He's not observant, but he calls in rabbis to do it. A kosher certifying agency. So a kosher certifying agency would say, listen, we have to have the keys to this and that. That's part of the business. They say, how's this going to work? Dairy will be here, meat will be over here, everything's going to be totally separate, all the things are going to be separate. The rabbis ask them, but what happens if someone buys a kosher hot dog here and walks down the ramp and then wants to buy a kosher ice cream, dairy? He says, I can't police that. He said, well, we don't want to be part of that. So this kosher certifying agency wrote to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, question, should we get involved in such a thing? So now, let's remember, observant people know better than to do that. Who's going to do that? Someone who doesn't care about mixing milk and meat. So text 8, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says, it's certainly a great thing the kosher agency does when it supplies an on-site kosher supervisor to oversee kashrus. You should do it. Also, you must be intelligent with the approach to supervision to ensure that you're not deceived as the director is untrustworthy. The person doing doesn't know what he's doing. You guys got to watch it. It requires thought and consideration. It's a much longer response, and in such scenarios to ensure that the supervision is carried out well and with clarity. It is a great merit to the kosher agency that they will save thousands of souls from consuming forbidden foods. But what he's saying is like this. You're not worried about the observant people. You're worried about the non-observant people. Non-observant people just came and bought a kosher hot dog. Why? Maybe because the grandmother did, or maybe because it's closer than the non-kosher hot dog, which is down the hall. But that's great. You're worried that maybe they're going to go buy a kosher ice cream when they shouldn't? That's a problem. Meanwhile, you're having many people who are not going to be doing that, and they're going to be eating kosher, just a kosher ice cream, or just a kosher hot dog, and you're going to be allowing people, you're not fooling anyone. You're not making anyone do it. And those who know are not going to do it. Some people who would have done it with non-kosher are not going to do it with kosher. But the fact is that now you're having so many people preventing them from consuming forbidden foods. For even preventing the non-observant from violating prohibitions to the extent possible is a great mitzvah. And this is very much a Torah idea. So you say, 1 second, I don't care. I would do it. And you say that somehow you're behind the scenes, so you just tricked me into eating a kosher hot dog, and now you're giving a pat on the back. You know something? Yeah. Because if we see it as something important for the soul, and we see we're all brethren, we're all brothers and sisters, and we want the best for each other. So the idea of supplying a kosher, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is saying, supplying kosher food, and so people will make a mistake. They would make the mistake anyway. You're not making them do it, but meanwhile, you're providing is this on-site, and in a lot of stadiums, I mean a lot, but in a good number of stadiums today, you have kosher food, and it provides a tremendous service to people, because when they're at a Devil's game, they want to eat something, so they may as well get kosher.
It's no different than the story that you told about how people get to services. It's not your business or your problem how they get here. It's your business and your problem once they're here. So if people drive here, they drive here, even though we're all walking. And when we leave here, we're driving, even though we're all walking. Your concern is
This
so you called your share in Sacramento and you asked him.
he's Santa Monica, yeah. This doesn't mean it's really important, and just because if you bring it up that way, it doesn't mean, Scott, that
It doesn't mean that you don't care.
it shouldn't mean we don't care, and it doesn't mean we don't care, and it doesn't mean to condone anything. And there's actually I think I told you, someone who was becoming closer to closer to Jewish observance, and has since moved out quite a while ago. But lived in Berkeley Heights. Remember, she called me once, and her family was getting very engaged and moving along nicely in their Jewish observance. She said, according to what I'm reading, I shouldn't be coming to synagogue on Shabbos. So I just thought, she was on the phone. I said, I didn't answer her. She said, "Is that okay?" I said, "I don't know, why are you asking me questions?" So, and then she's asked again. I said, generally, if I'm my ways, if I haven't heard your question the first time or the second time, I'm probably not going to hear it the third time either. So she said, I want you to tell me. I said, I'm not going to tell you can drive the shul. I can't do that. So she said, so you're telling me I can't? I said, that's your conclusion. That's I'm not saying you're wrong. And for her, she stopped coming. That's up to God. It wasn't. I don't. It's not where I would have gone. It's. But how could I? I could never tell it to. But I preferred not to be asked the question. All right. Now, text 9. Along these lines, text 9 and 10, you have also from Maimonides, but a very important perspective on just the idea of a mitzvah decontextualized. He writes, calling throughout the entire year, because this part where he was, before this, he was talking about Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, a person should always look at himself or herself as equally balanced between merit and sin, and the world is equally balanced between merit and sin. We have to see ourselves, the next thing we do, that tips the scale. If we perform one sin, we tip their personal balance and that of the entire world to the side of guilt and bring destruction upon themselves. Conversely, if they perform one mitzvah, they tip their personal balance and that of the entire world to the side of merit and bring deliverance and salvation to themselves and others. This is implied by the verse, a righteous person is the foundation of the world. One who acts righteously tips the balance of the entire world to merit and saves. I mean, that explains a little bit the urgency. Like, why am I going to schlep someone into my office to go put on tefillin? It's leave them alone. I don't want to. I'm not looking to harass people. But if we see it, if we see it as something, this mitzvah is an opportunity for mitzvah, and in our lives and in the scope of the world, this is important. Every single individual mitzvah is important according to Maimonides. Let's do it. Person's going to say, yeah, but you know what I did this morning? I don't care what you did this morning. I want to. We have an opportunity for a mitzvah now. And to take this a little further, and this is to Andrew's point before, the Mishnah says, Ben Azai says, run to do a slight mitzvah and run away from a violation. For one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah, one violation leads to another violation. While we can't necessarily forecast it, and the idea of putting on film with someone or lighting Shabbos, having someone light Shabbos candles is not because we'll do this because we think what's going to happen later. No, we do it now because it now is important. But let's be conscious that doing good things breeds more good things. Good behavior begets good behavior. And that's what the Talmud tells us. And so Maimonides is not saying that. Maimonides is saying, look at the golden opportunity you have now, but we're saying even beyond that, maybe just as the life works, we will have repercussions that will have an echo going forward. Back to text 11. In text 11, back to the Maimonides and his essay on conversion. He framed it in an interesting way from the Talmud. So there's an idea of sneaking a mitzvah. What does sneaking a mitzvah mean? A person that is living in a way where they don't see themselves as being observant. They don't see themselves as being connected to God. People don't see them as such and say, you know something? Just come here. Let's do a mitzvah anyway. You stole a moment to be able to do a mitzvah. Sneak a mitzvah, it's okay. Our sages of blessed memory explain, text 11, on 125, that when one who sins willingly comes to the synagogue to pray, we accept them and in no way disparage them. These are people who had converted. This idea is predicated upon King Solomon's words They do not despise the thief if he steals to fill its soul of its hunger. There's such a thing as soul hunger. And he was talking about a thief, not as a thief, but someone who's shoplifting. The idea of someone, in other words, do not despise the sinners of Israel if they steal a mitzvah. They come in the secret to steal mitzvahs. It means that to snatch a mitzvah, sneak a mitzvah. Okay, so now we're going to go to text 12. But before we do that, so how do we see this? See that an individual mitzvah, a decontextualized mitzvah, in and of itself, even if it runs against our general attitude to life, is valuable. It's valuable to God. It's valuable to us. But we have a relationship with God. It's not just we're not just employees. In a relationship, if someone important to me, or if I vis-a-vis someone important to me, if I do a certain behavior again and again and again and again to the other person's dissatisfaction, the fact that I didn't do it right now, that's good. But then when I go back to the old behavior, the other behaviors, it's hard to take it seriously. So how can God look at a random decontextualized mitzvah seriously? Text 12. And this is from the founder of Chabad. He tells us that when a Jew performs a mitzvah, all of our divine and animating souls, means our human persona, are perfectly united with the divine will of God. This is a very important part of his mindset. Right now we're studying Torah. Right now we are engaging in a mitzvah. Right now, whether we feel it or not, we are connected to the divine. We're using our human understanding, human logic, we're processing, we're engaged. We are engaged in embracing God and God embracing us. Perfect unity. From God's perspective, this union exists internally. For God and his will exist beyond time. So we say, okay, so I embraced now, but then I close the book and I go and I'm going to do something else. Every mitzvah is actually timeless. Every mitzvah is eternal because God's eternal. And we're touching godliness. God's speech, namely the Torah, is also beyond time. Is only here on earth where we are subject to time, that this union is subject to the whims of time. For later, when we engage in other tasks, we separate ourselves from that union. So, is someone who I care about, here I'm engaged, but I'm disengaged, and they get confused. God wants me to be totally engaged, but every moment I'm engaged, that's an eternal thing. It's something that no one can ever take away from me, no matter what I do for the rest of my life. This is an eternal, lasting, beautiful union I have with God that resonates in my soul. And text 13 from the Rabbi, following this idea, he says, when a Jew does a mitzvah, they forge an eternal bond and union with God. As the Alter Rebbe, the Rabbi Zalman explains in Tanya, this union exists forever, which is what we just read before. This means that when a Jew recites Psalms for 5 minutes, he or she has not only connected to God for 5 minutes, but for eternity. The union that exists beyond time has manifested within the constraints of time. Within our finite existence, we are experiencing the idea of an eternal bond. And every time I do a mitzvah. Now, one might think, yeah, but if it's not consistent, it doesn't feel authentic. So here, text 14 would say, the simplest Jews, including even those who sin, usually give up their lives for God and are prepared to endure harsh suffering so as not to deny God. They do so despite the fact that they are ignorant and do not appreciate God's greatness. Rabbi Zalman brings a very important point here that is a backbone for how we see the world and how we see the Jewish people. He says, looking at history, especially with the Christian oppressions, where we had many Jews who were told either kiss the crucifix or kiss the sword. They will kill you, or defy, burn them alive, whatever they did, if a person did not renounce their Judaism and accept Jesus. And the phenomenon that happened was that many, many, many Jews gave up their lives, even if they were not observant or learned Jews. Why would they have done that? And what Rabbi Zalman is saying is that deep inside, we all want to feel connected to God, and say, okay, I can't do this, I can't do that. We have our own understandings of God. God gets us, we get God. But if something comes up where I'm going to feel this is something that violates everything, I'm just not going to do it. And I just had something now, but I've had similar many times. I shouldn't say many times, a number of times where someone who was considering marrying out, and talk to me about it, whatever it is, say, but the deal was no Christmas tree. I say, you worried about a tree? That's your problem? And whatever, I don't know why it is. It's the same thing. It's like, I can't do that. Simple thing. Marrying a Catholic girl, not a problem. Christmas tree, oh, that's going to do it all. But that is really like almost a deal breaker. It's I don't understand it. But it's in the mind. That means I crossed over. Now, today's day, I know plenty of Jew married to Jew also have Christmas trees. But but the thing is that it's like we have these kind of artificial sometimes these boundaries there. Oh, I can never do that, and we make them ourselves. We take it off again. Maybe you understand the Christmas tree part. I can't, but for it's what Rabbi Zalman said. I think I see it in real life, in that people, they create their own structure where God and me, we're good, but they would never violate. And they'll do whatever they can not to violate. Obviously, none of us are threatened with our lives, God forbid, but there is this inner connection we have with God. Therefore, what does that mean? It means we're asked if it's authentic. The idea is that we all have an authentic relationship with God. And we're just sometimes not conscious of it. And, when I'm talking to someone who says they don't believe in God, I'm not, they say I don't believe in God, I take them at their word. But to me, I never really accept that. That means I just have to dig. Because deep inside, I think, look at it, to me, it's like a parent who says, I want nothing to do with my child. I've been told that. And it's tragic. It means there's a lot of pain. So I can't believe there's actually a parent who doesn't want to have to do with their child. We just have to dig. We have to find it, because I think it's there. How can a parent not want to have to do with their child? I know there's a lot of hurt, but hopefully, we can get it together. I can't create the love of a parent to a child. I can't create the love of a Jew for God. But I can take away some of the schmutz, help uncover it. That's my job. So here, what it's saying is, doing a mitzvah is, yes, it's temporary, and you're doing this, and there's all the rest. But what you did is you've shown your real self. That's authentic. Doing the stuff that's not connection with God, that's the inauthentic self. But let's say, just because I'm doing more inauthentic than authentic, I shouldn't bury the authentic. I got to keep the authentic going. And finally, in text 15, we'll take a look at how the Rebbe saw this in the, just bring everything full circle to the idea of the tabernacle. He said the tabernacle and the donations leading up to it, because that's in this week's Torah portion. This was the first building drive. It was in this week's Torah portion, synagogue building drive. Impart an important message to every Jew in every time. From time to time, a Jew may feel as if they are in a desert. Jews are in a desert, right? So they're not in Jerusalem, in their own country, building this massive edifice for a temple. They're in the wilderness, they're in the desert, a place devoid of civilization. In other words, what does that mean personally? We're in a desert. I'm not in a desert, I'm in Basking Ridge, but I can feel devoid of spirituality and holiness. And such thoughts can lead to despair. So you can think, Rabbi, how many people have told me to focus on my kids? Too late for me. What does it mean? They feel that they're in a desert. So we tell this Jew, even in the desert, you can have a tabernacle. There's such a thing as a tabernacle in the desert. And what's more, the eternal command to build a sanctuary began and was implanted with the tabernacle that was for Jews who were in a desert-like state. And it was a temporary tabernacle. And still, the Torah writes a whole Torah portion about it. For Jews in the desert, creating holiness for this slice of time. It wasn't going to last forever. And it deserves its own Torah portion because there is tremendous holiness in it. So now we'll go to the key points. 129. Number one, there's unlimited value to every mitzvah we do, no matter where we're coming from. And two, Jewish law encourages every Jew to take an opportunity to perform mitzvah, even if there are other mitzvahs they do not keep. Number three, even if we are unable to keep some aspects of a mitzvah, it is worthwhile to keep those aspects we can. Number four, although we might not see the lasting significance of a single mitzvah, God transcends time, and every moment we connect Him creates an eternal bond with Him. We should not, whatever the next one, we should not let our past behavior define us and cause us to feel hypocritical when we do a new mitzvah. And every time we are able to fulfill a mitzvah, we're expressing our authentic godly core. Number four, what's an important thing, a take home is that even later today or tomorrow, remember, we created a mitzvah. The last time you did a mitzvah, and the other times you did a mitzvah, you created something eternal and holy that resonates even where you are now. That's always it. No one takes it. It can never take it away from you. You carry it with you. We carry our mitzvahs with us, and they're timeless. So now, let's see if I missed anything. All right. So if there are any questions, we can explore them. If not,
So can I have a question?
sure.
Okay, so we're talking about the rabbi in Cherry Hill, and there was an issue as to whether or not he would be welcome. But when there are Jews in prison, there's no question but that they are welcome, right? Rabbis go in to pray with them, to provide them with services. And if somebody has been in prison and is either done, they're on parole, or they're done with their sentence, even though they are, they've done whatever the crime is, they're still welcome. So what's the question with excluding the guy?
I think that it's a psychological, it's a human comfort thing. Imagine, think of someone who is a child molester, done horrible thing. For me, being even in the same room is not an easy thing for me. I feel so appalled what they've done. So if someone came along and said, you have a convicted child molester, you're allowing him in shul. Now, I think that there you have a question is who's watching to make sure that it doesn't get near any kids. So maybe that's not a good example. But let's say there is that. We have that. Or he's coming to the wisdom circle, which is, there's no kids there. No one's in danger. But it's creepy. And it's creepy because it should be creepy, because he does something horrible. And so I don't really have a question of people coming to say, you're going to let someone who murdered his wife into shul? You're going to let this or Bernie Madoff into shul? I could understand that. And at the same time, I would say, if he asks you to invest with him during davening, let me know and we'll send him home. There's nothing. There should be such a thing as a repugnance, a moral repugnance to things where people do horrible things. And for people to feel it's hard, listen, that a guy, a rabbi, a leader of a congregation, hired a hitman to murder his wife, that should shock senses. And if if showing up in a shul, I could see, and I understood people saying, not here. I don't want to be in the same room as a guy. But they had to be calmed down. I really don't have it was morally repugnant. And yet we say even morally, a morally repugnant brother is still my brother. And as long as he's not hurting anybody, he's welcome in my house. Yes.
I want to know what happened.
Gennadi's asking a question.
What happened to the tabernacle that was built in desert? Was it brought?
Ask
by the
Harrison
Jews?
Ford.
Harrison Ford. Yes, I could tell. But was it brought to the land of Israel? Or in
It
the-
went to the land of Israel. It was in the land of Israel for 369 years.
Until the first temple was built.
Yes.
So we have good hope for this temple.
For the temple?
For this temple.
This temple?
Yeah, we can dismantle it and take it to the Holy Land.
We don't have to dismantle it. God wants it in the Holy Land. They'll figure out how to get it. If he can bring Mashiach, he can bring us. I'm not going to get into his bookkeeping. Meanwhile, we'll make it nice for here.
Temporary base.
Every Chabad starts out with
Everything should go. What?
every Chabad starts out with a tabernacle, your little ranch house, and then you build and build, and you have a permanent or a storefront.
Gennady, because Gennady is a real chassid, he's pointing out that since we wait for Mashiach every day, that whatever we do ultimately has a certain there's a certain temporary element to it.
Potentially staying here for 217 years.
I know people who will put it into their wedding invitations that the wedding will take place, God willing, in Jerusalem. But if Mashiach hasn't come, it'll be in Livingston.
We cover all the bases.
Yeah. All right. Have a great week.
Thank you. All right, good week.